The morning sun cast long shadows across Venice Beach as people hustled past a solitary figure seated on a weathered wooden bench. The woman, in her early 50s, sat with a kind of straight-backed posture that spoke of years of military training. Her eyes, sharp and alert despite her circumstances, scanned the bustling boardwalk with the careful attention of someone who had learned to always be aware of their surroundings. Her old military backpack, faded from desert sun and marked with unit patches, rested carefully beside her boots that had once marched across foreign lands, but now carried her through the streets of Los Angeles. The jacket she wore, though clean and carefully maintained, showed signs of wear that spoke of countless nights spent outdoors. Yet there was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet dignity that set her apart from others in similar situations. Through gaps in her jacket, glimpses of military medals caught the morning light. These weren't displayed prominently. They weren't meant to draw attention or sympathy. They were simply part of who she was, remnants of a life dedicated to service that now seemed worlds away from this sunny California morning. Tourists streamed past, their chatter and laughter creating a stark contrast to her silence. Some clutched shopping bags from nearby boutiques, others carried surfboards or led excited children toward the beach. A street performer nearby drew crowds with upbeat music, the sound of coins dropping into his guitar case, creating a steady rhythm that mixed with the crash of waves and cry of seagulls. The woman adjusted her position slightly, wincing at the old injury that still troubled her on cold mornings. Her hands, rough from years of work, but meticulously clean, smoothed down her worn jeans, a gesture that spoke of someone holding on to standards and routines, even when circumstances had changed dramatically. A small notebook peeked out from her pocket, its pages filled with neat handwriting, locations of free meals, shelter addresses, job possibilities, and the kind of practical information that became crucial when living on the streets. Morning joggers passed by, some slowing slightly to look at her before quickening their pace. A young couple walked their dog, the animal pulling toward her until its owners tugged it away with apologetic glances. She acknowledged none of this, maintaining her dignified pose as if she were seated in a park on a pleasant morning rather than facing another day of uncertainty. A coffee shop employee stepped out to sweep the sidewalk, pausing briefly to offer her a kind smile and a small cup of coffee, a daily ritual that had developed over the past few weeks. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, her voice carrying the kind of gentle strength that suggested she was used to giving orders rather than accepting charity. The steam rose from the cup as she held it carefully, savoring its warmth. Her eyes drifted to a group of young Marines walking past in their civilian clothes, their military bearing as obvious to her as her own must be to them. They noticed her too, a quick glance, a subtle nod of recognition. In that brief moment, an understanding passed between them, a reminder of the brotherhood and sisterhood that transcended current circumstances. As the morning crowd began to thin, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a small photo, creased and worn from frequent handling. The image showed a younger version of herself in full military dress, standing proud beside her unit. Her fingers traced the faces in the photograph, each one a memory of better days, of purpose and belonging. The California sun climbed higher, promising another warm day. Beach vendors began setting up their stalls, the scent of fresh-baked pretzels and hot dogs beginning to fill the air. She carefully tucked the photo away and straightened her jacket, preparing for another day of invisible battles, fighting not against a foreign enemy now, but against the system that had left her and so many others behind. Little did she know that this ordinary morning was about to become extraordinary, as fate was about to cross her path with someone who would change everything. But for now, she sat quietly, maintaining her dignity and strength, a silent testament to both the cost of service and the resilience of the human spirit. The late morning crowd had begun to thin when the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle engine cut through the usual beach sounds. A few heads turned as the bike pulled into a nearby parking spot, its rider moving with the kind of fluid grace that comes from years of experience. The man switched off the engine and removed his helmet, revealing a face that countless moviegoers would recognize instantly: Keanu Reeves. He wasn't dressed for attention. His well-worn motorcycle jacket had seen better days, and his boots showed scuffs from countless rides. His hair was slightly messy from the helmet, and a few days' worth of stubble softened his jawline. There was something about the way he moved, purposeful but unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world on this sunny California morning. A few tourists did double takes as he walked past, nudging their companions and pulling out phones. But Keanu had mastered the art of being simultaneously visible and invisible, acknowledging people with a slight nod while maintaining his course. He wasn't here for photos or autographs. Something else had caught his attention. His eyes had locked onto the military patches on the backpack beside the bench, recognition flickering across his features. Having played military roles and worked with veterans for various film preparations, he knew enough to recognize the significance of those patches. But it was more than that. It was the dignified way the woman held herself, even in circumstances that would break many others. He paused near a coffee cart, buying 2 cups. The vendor's eyes widened in recognition, but Keanu just gave a friendly smile and a quiet thank you. He had learned long ago that the best way to handle fame was with genuine kindness. It tended to encourage others to respond in kind. As he approached the bench, he noticed more details. The medals partially visible through the woman's jacket weren't being displayed for sympathy. They were simply part of who she was, like the straight spine and alert eyes that spoke of years of service. He could see the slight tremor in her hands that suggested either injury or illness, yet she maintained perfect composure. A group of teenagers nearby had noticed him and were whispering excitedly, phones raised. But Keanu's attention remained focused on the bench and its occupant. He'd seen enough in his life to know that sometimes the most important moments happen when you step outside your usual path, when you take the time to really see the people others pass by. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice carrying that distinctive gentle tone that fans would recognize instantly. He held out one of the coffee cups as an offering. "I got an extra by mistake, and it seems a shame to waste it." The woman looked up, surprise flickering briefly across her features before being replaced by the careful neutrality that comes from years of dealing with unexpected situations. Her eyes assessed him quickly, not as a celebrity, but as another person entering her space. There was a moment of hesitation, then a slight nod. He settled onto the bench, careful to leave appropriate space between them. The coffee cup changed hands with the kind of careful precision that spoke of military training. Up close, he could see the weather-worn quality of her skin, the way exhaustion had left its marks around her eyes, yet hadn't diminished the sharp intelligence in her gaze. A cool breeze rolled in from the ocean, carrying the salt spray and the distant calls of seagulls. More people were noticing now, slowing their walks to stare or take photos, but Keanu remained focused on the moment. He'd learned long ago that real connections happen in these quiet spaces between the noise of daily life. "Beautiful morning," he commented, his tone casual but genuine. It wasn't the kind of practiced small talk celebrities often use, but rather the simple observation of someone willing to share a moment of appreciation for life's basic pleasures. The woman's response was measured, her voice carrying the kind of quiet strength that comes from facing life's hardest challenges. As they sat there, 2 strangers sharing a bench and coffee on a sunny morning, something shifted in the air around them. It wasn't about celebrity or status anymore. It was about 2 human beings finding a moment of genuine connection in a world that too often rushes past such opportunities. Neither of them knew it yet, but this simple moment would spark a chain of events that would change not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. For now, though, it was just about sharing space, sharing coffee, and remembering that sometimes the most profound moments start with the simplest gestures. The first words between them floated away with the ocean breeze, replaced by a comfortable silence that felt more natural than forced conversation. Keanu took a sip of his coffee, his eyes scanning the horizon where waves met sky. He'd had countless conversations with fans over the years, but this felt different, more real, more important somehow. "These benches," he said finally, running his hand along the weathered wood, "they've probably seen more stories than any Hollywood script." His voice carried that gentle thoughtfulness that had become his trademark, but there was nothing rehearsed about his words. The woman's lip quirked slightly, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of the truth in his observation. Around them, life on Venice Beach continued its daily dance. Street vendors called out their wares, skateboarders wove through the morning crowd, and the persistent California sun climbed higher in the sky. A few people had stopped to take pictures, but something about the scene, perhaps the quiet dignity of it, kept most at a respectful distance. The woman shifted slightly, her military bearing never quite relaxing. Most people, she said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet strength that comes from years of command, they either stare too long or work too hard at not staring at all. She paused, taking a careful sip of her coffee. You're doing neither. Keanu nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He'd experienced both reactions himself, though under very different circumstances. Sometimes, he replied, the hardest thing to do is just be present in a moment without trying to change it. A child's laughter rang out nearby, drawing their attention to a young family playing in the sand. The woman's eyes lingered on them, something flickering across her face, not envy, but perhaps remembrance of different times, different possibilities. You know, Keanu continued, his tone conversational but genuine, I've played a lot of roles in my life. Soldiers, heroes, all sorts of characters. But the real heroes, he gestured subtly to her medals, they don't wear their courage on movie posters. The woman's hands automatically went to her medals, touching them with a familiarity born of years. These, she said, her voice taking on a distant quality. Sometimes they feel like they belong to someone else. Someone who had a clear mission, a purpose. She looked down at her worn boots. The battlefield was easier than this. At least there, you knew who was on your side. Keanu listened, really listened, in that way that made you forget he was one of the most famous actors in the world. There was no pity in his expression, no uncomfortable shifting or checking his watch. Just presence, just humanity meeting humanity on a sunny morning by the ocean. A street musician nearby began playing a soft melody on his guitar, the notes drifting over on the breeze. The woman's fingers tapped slightly against her coffee cup, keeping time with the music. It was such a human gesture, so unconscious and natural that it seemed to break down some invisible barrier. You want to know the funny thing? She said, her voice warming slightly. I've gotten pretty good at reading people out here. Survival skill, I guess. But you? She glanced at him with a hint of amusement. You're exactly like everyone says you are. Keanu laughed, a genuine sound that carried no pretense. And what do they say? That you're real. That you don't just act human, you are human. She straightened her jacket, a military habit that hadn't faded with time. Do you know how rare that is? Especially in this city? The morning crowd had grown, creating a constant flow of people moving past their bench. Some slowed down, phones raised discreetly, but the bubble of quiet conversation between the actor and the veteran remained surprisingly undisturbed. Perhaps there was something about the scene that made even the most eager fan think twice about interrupting. You know what I've learned? Keanu said, watching a flock of seagulls wheel overhead. Everyone has a story worth hearing if you're willing to take the time to listen. And sometimes, he paused, choosing his words carefully, sometimes the most important conversations happen on random benches with complete strangers. The woman studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Her military bearing remained, but something had softened around her eyes. It wasn't trust, not exactly. Life had taught her to be careful with that. But perhaps it was the recognition of genuine intention, of someone who saw her not as a problem to be solved or a charity case to ease their conscience, but as a fellow human being with a story worth hearing. As the morning warmed, the conversation deepened like the lengthening shadows beneath the bench. The veteran's hands moved as she spoke, painting pictures in the air of desert nights and mountain patrols. Her voice carried the weight of experiences few civilians could understand, yet she shared them with a quiet strength that made even the hardest stories bearable. The thing about service, she explained, watching a group of joggers pass by, is that it becomes part of who you are. Not just the uniform or the medals, but the way you see the world. She paused, absently touching the worn edge of her jacket. Sometimes I think that's what makes coming home so hard. The world keeps moving like nothing's changed, but you're watching it through different eyes. Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. Having portrayed soldiers in films, he'd spent countless hours listening to veteran stories, but this felt different, raw, real, unscripted. I've heard, he said carefully, that the hardest battlefield is sometimes the one you face when you come back. The woman's eyes met his, sharp with recognition. You've talked to others like me. I've listened to them, he corrected gently. There's a difference. A street vendor's call broke through their conversation, reminding them of the world spinning around their quiet bubble. More people had gathered nearby, trying to appear casual while stealing glances at the unlikely pair. Someone with a professional-looking camera had stopped to adjust their lens, but something about the scene, perhaps its simple humanity, made them lower the camera and walk away. "You know what's funny?" the veteran continued, her voice taking on a distant quality. "When you're out there, in the field, everything's clear. Your mission, your purpose, your place in the world, it's all laid out. Even the danger makes sense." She looked down at her worn boots. "But here? The dangers are different, invisible. They wear suits and sit behind desks, shuffling papers that can change your life." Keanu listened intently, his usual gentle expression deepened by understanding. Having navigated Hollywood's complex landscape for decades, he understood something about invisible battles and unexpected enemies. Sometimes, he offered, the hardest fight is with a system that wasn't built to understand you. A child's ball rolled near their bench, followed by quick pattering feet. The veteran caught it automatically, her reflexes still sharp, and handed it back to the wide-eyed child with a small smile. The moment passed quickly, but it revealed something. A gentleness beneath the military bearing, a humanity undiminished by hardship. "The dreams are the worst," she said suddenly, as if the words had escaped before she could catch them. "Not the bad ones, birds I expect, it's the good ones. Dreams where everything's normal, where you're back in your old life, with a roof over your head and a purpose to your days." She took a deep breath. "Then you wake up on concrete or a shelter cot and have to remember all over again." The morning had grown warmer, but a slight shiver passed through her frame. Keanu noticed but didn't comment, understanding that some tremors come from places no jacket can warm. "You know what I miss most?" she continued, her voice softening. "Not the big things, the house, the job, all that. I miss the small stuff. Making coffee in my own kitchen, having neighbors who know your name, being able to help others instead of always being the one who needs help." A group of young Marines walked past, their civilian clothes not quite hiding their military bearing. They noticed the veteran, their eyes catching on her medals, and offered subtle nods of recognition. She returned the gesture, that unspoken brotherhood transcending her current circumstances. "People think homeless veterans are just statistics," she said, watching the young Marines disappear into the crowd. "Numbers in some government report. They don't see the stories, the service, the lives we lived before. They don't understand that sometimes the strongest soldiers are the ones sitting quietly on benches, fighting battles nobody can see." Keanu's expression shifted, something resolving in his eyes. He'd come to Venice Beach that morning for a simple motorcycle ride, but fate had other plans. Sometimes, he realized, the most important moments in life come disguised as chance encounters. The sun had climbed higher, the beach growing more crowded with each passing minute. Their coffee cups sat empty between them, the simple gesture that had started their conversation now a bridge to something deeper. Neither of them knew it yet, but this sharing of stories was about to transform into something more, a catalyst for change that would ripple out far beyond their bench by the ocean. What happened next caught even the growing crowd of onlookers by surprise. Keanu pulled out his phone, but not for the selfie many might have expected. Instead, his fingers moved quickly across the screen, scrolling through contacts that represented years of connections in both Hollywood and humanitarian circles. "I know some people," he said quietly, his voice carrying that distinctive, gentle determination. "People who might be able to help, not just with temporary solutions, but real, lasting change." He looked up at the veteran, his expression serious. "Would you be willing to let them try?" The veteran's posture stiffened slightly, that military pride visible in the straightening of her spine. "I'm not looking for charity," she said firmly, years of dignity evident in her tone. "I've filled out all the forms, waded in all the lines. The system," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "it's not always designed to understand people like us." Keanu nodded, understanding flickering across his features. "This isn't charity," he explained, his voice warm but firm. "Think of it more like reinforcements. Sometimes the hardest part of any battle is knowing when to accept backup." His first call was to a veterans organization he'd worked with quietly for years. The conversation was brief but purposeful, conducted in low tones that somehow cut through the growing beach noise. The veteran watched his face as he spoke, years of reading people helping her recognize the genuine concern in his expression. Next, he reached out to a real estate contact, someone who managed several properties in the area. The conversation wasn't about favors or publicity, it was about immediate solutions, about turning empty spaces into opportunities. All around them, the morning crowd had grown, phones discreetly recording what looked like a simple conversation, but was actually the beginning of something much bigger. There's a rehabilitation program, he explained between calls, specifically designed for female veterans. The woman who runs it, she served too. She understands what it's like to come back to a world that feels like it's speaking a different language. The veteran's eyes showed a flicker of interest, quickly guarded. She'd heard promises before, seen how quickly they could evaporate in the harsh light of reality. But there was something different about this moment, about the quiet efficiency with which this famous actor was dismantling the barriers she'd faced for months. A young woman who worked at a nearby coffee shop approached, carrying fresh cups of coffee. She'd been watching the scene unfold all morning, and something about it had touched her heart. "On the house," she said softly, placing the cups near them. The gesture was small, but it represented something larger, how one act of kindness could inspire others to act as well. Keanu made another call, this time to a medical center that specialized in veteran care. His voice took on a different tone, not the polite requests of earlier calls, but the firm insistence of someone who understood that sometimes bureaucracy needed a gentle push to move faster. "The paperwork," the veteran began, her voice carrying a hint of wariness. "It's always the paperwork that—" "We'll handle it," Keanu interrupted gently. "All of it. Sometimes the system works better when people who understand it help navigate it." He paused, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Consider it a tactical advantage." The morning had fully bloomed now, the beach filling with the usual mix of tourists, locals, and street performers. But around their bench, something extraordinary was happening. With each call, each quiet conversation, the impossible began to feel possible. The mountain of obstacles that had seemed insurmountable just hours ago was being dismantled, piece by piece. "I have one more call to make," Keanu said, scrolling through his contacts. "There's someone who works with job placement for veterans. Not just any jobs, positions that value your experience, your leadership skills." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Because those medals? They're not just decorations. They're proof of capabilities that any smart employer should want." The veteran watched as he made the final call, her expression a complex mixture of hope and careful skepticism. She'd learned the hard way not to trust in easy solutions, but this felt different. This wasn't about handouts or quick fixes. This was about someone taking the time to understand the real challenges, to address them with the kind of thoroughness that came from genuine care. As the morning wore on, their bench had become more than just a place to sit. It had become a command center of sorts, a place where the seemingly impossible was being transformed into the achievable. The crowd of onlookers had grown, but they maintained a respectful distance, sensing that they were witnessing something more meaningful than just a celebrity's random act of kindness. This was about recognizing that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, a shared coffee, a willing ear, and the determination to do more than just talk about problems. It was about understanding that every person, regardless of their current circumstances, deserves the chance to reclaim their dignity and their place in the world. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Venice Beach as Keanu's plan moved from words into action. His motorcycle remained parked nearby, forgotten in the urgency of the moment. What had started as a chance encounter was transforming into something more meaningful with each passing hour. "First things first," he said, putting away his phone after the last call. "There's a hotel a few blocks from here. Clean, quiet, family-owned. They work with veteran support programs." He spoke carefully, watching her reaction. "It's not a permanent solution, but it's a safe place to catch your breath while we sort out the rest." The veteran's hands tightened slightly on her backpack, that military instinct to keep your gear close, to be ready to move at a moment's notice. "I don't know," she began, that pride still evident in her bearing. "Hotels aren't really in my budget right now." Keanu shook his head gently. "Already taken care of. Remember what I said about reinforcements?" A small smile crossed his face. "Consider it a tactical repositioning while we coordinate the next phase." A young hotel employee arrived, having walked from the nearby hotel after Keanu's call. She carried herself with quiet respect, understanding that this wasn't a typical check-in situation. No fanfare, no fuss, just quiet efficiency and genuine care. "The room's ready whenever you are," she said softly, her eyes showing understanding beyond her years. "Ground floor, quiet section, private entrance, just like you requested, sir." She handed over a key card, then stepped back, giving them space. The veteran looked at the key card, then at Keanu, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "You're really doing this," she said, not quite a question. "But why? You don't even know me." "Sometimes," he replied, his voice carrying that gentle wisdom he was known for, "knowing someone's story is more important than knowing their name. And sometimes the right thing to do is just the right thing to do." Together, they gathered her few possessions, the backpack, a small bag, the military jacket that had seen better days but still carried her pride in its patches and medals. The crowd that had gathered maintained a respectful distance, sensing that they were witnessing something private and meaningful. The walk to the hotel was short but significant. Keanu carried her larger bag, matching his pace to hers, noting but not commenting on the slight limp that combat injuries had left her with. They talked as they walked, not about the past anymore, but about the immediate future. "Tomorrow morning," he explained, "someone from the Veterans Program will meet you. She's a former officer herself, understands the system, knows how to cut through the red tape." He paused at a crosswalk, waiting for the light. "But tonight? Tonight is about rest. Real rest, in a real bed." The hotel was modest but well maintained, its lobby cool and quiet compared to the beach's afternoon heat. The staff had been briefed. No photos, no autograph requests, just professional courtesy and respect. The manager himself showed them to the room, his manner suggesting he understood the importance of what was happening. The room was simple but clean, with fresh linens and a view of a small courtyard garden. A few basic necessities had already been provided: toiletries, fresh towels, even a small coffee maker. Someone had thought to include a notepad and pen, understanding a soldier's need to maintain order through lists and plans. "The me fridge is stocked," the manager explained quietly, "and room service is available 24 hours. Just dial 0 if you need anything." He handed over a second key card and stepped back, his manner professional but kind. The veteran stood in the center of the room, her posture still military straight but something softer in her expression. The sight of a real bed, a private bathroom, a door that locked, simple things that most people took for granted, seemed to affect her more than any words could express. She started, then stopped, emotions warring with that military discipline. "Get some rest," Keanu said gently. "Tomorrow we start working on the permanent solutions. But tonight?" He gestured to the room. "Tonight is just about remembering what it feels like to have a space of your own." He left his personal number with her, not something he did lightly, and a promise to check in the next day. As he turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice carrying years of strength and newfound hope. "Thank you," she said simply, "not just for this, but for seeing me, really seeing me." Keanu paused at the door, his expression thoughtful. "You know what I've learned in life? Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of recognition. Tomorrow, we start changing things for real." As he walked back to his motorcycle, the afternoon sun warming his shoulders, Keanu knew that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. A reminder that sometimes all it takes to change a life is the willingness to stop, to listen, and to take action when action is needed. 3 months passed like waves rolling onto Venice Beach, each day bringing small changes that added up to something remarkable. The veteran who had once sat alone on a weathered bench now stood in front of a mirror in her own apartment, adjusting her collar before heading to work. The reflection showed more than just physical changes. There was a renewed sense of purpose in her eyes, a return of the confidence that military service had instilled years ago. The apartment was small but well kept, its walls decorated with her carefully preserved military medals and a few new photographs. One showed her with a group of other veterans at the support center where she now worked part-time, helping others navigate the same system she had struggled with. Another captured a moment at the beach, not of hardship, but of transformation, a reminder of the day everything changed. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Keanu, checking in as he still did regularly. Not with the awkward formality of a celebrity doing charity work, but with the genuine care of someone who had become part of her recovery story. "How's the new job going?" The message read, simple and direct, just like him. She smiled, typing back about her latest success, helping a young veteran find housing and medical care. The system hadn't become any less complicated, but she had learned to navigate it, to use her own experience to light the way for others. Her military training had found a new purpose, not in combat, but in the equally important battle of helping fellow veterans reclaim their lives. At the Veterans Center where she worked, her story had become something of a legend, though she always told it with humility. "It wasn't just about the help I received," she would explain to the other veterans. "It was about being seen as a person, not a problem. Sometimes that's all it takes to start believing in yourself again." The center had grown busier in recent months. Word had spread through the veteran community about a place where people really understood, where help came with respect rather than pity. Local businesses had started reaching out, offering job opportunities specifically for veterans. The ripple effect of one morning's kindness had spread far beyond that bench by the ocean. Keanu had kept his promise to stay involved, but always quietly, without fanfare. He would stop by the center occasionally, not as a celebrity but as someone who cared about the work being done there. His presence reminded everyone that real change often starts with simple human connection. The veteran's old military backpack still sat in her apartment, now more of a symbol than a necessity. She kept it as a reminder, not of hardship, but of resilience. Sometimes, when new veterans came to the center feeling lost and hopeless, she would tell them about that morning on the bench, about how life can change when someone takes the time to really see you. Her story had inspired others in unexpected ways. Local coffee shops started keeping tabs for veterans in need. The hotel that had given her that first night of safety now had a formal program for veteran housing assistance. Small changes, perhaps, but they added up to something bigger, a community learning to take care of its own. The afternoon sun streamed through her apartment window, casting warm light on her uniform, pressed and ready for tomorrow's work at the center. A stack of papers sat on her desk, applications and forms she was helping other veterans navigate. She understood the system now, knew its shortcuts and challenges, and used that knowledge to help others find their way through. She thought back to that morning on the bench, to the feeling of being invisible to the passing crowd. Now she made sure no veteran who came to the center felt that way. "We see you," she would tell them, meaning every word. "Your service mattered then, and your life matters now." A calendar on her wall showed upcoming events: veteran support group meetings, job fairs, housing assistance workshops. She was no longer just surviving, she was helping others thrive. The military had taught her leadership, and now she had found a new way to use those skills. The sun was setting over Los Angeles as she finished preparing for tomorrow's work. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Keanu. "Remember the bench?" It read. "It's still there. Different people sitting on it now, but same stories, same need for someone to stop and listen." She smiled, understanding the deeper meaning. Tomorrow, she would help more veterans find their way back from the edge. Tomorrow, she would continue the chain of kindness that had started on a random morning with an unexpected conversation. As night fell over the city, she looked out her window at the lights below. Somewhere out there, another veteran might be sitting alone, feeling invisible. But tomorrow would bring new opportunities, new chances for connection. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments: a shared coffee, a willing ear, and the courage to accept help when it's offered with respect and understanding.